we'll start by introducing ourselves. We just want to make sure, can everyone hear us okay? If we speak loud enough? Okay, perfect. So I'm Daniela Castillo.
And I'm Maya Miller.
Before we introduce ourselves, tell you what we do at Prep, what we did for this internship, we just wanted to say thank you everyone for coming. It really means a lot to us. We put a lot of work in this summer, so all of you being here really means a lot. So Maya and I, we've been friends for a while now. We are both part of the mock trial team here at Seattle Prep. We've done it for 4 years. We see a lot of our friends from mock trial here in the audience, so thanks for coming, guys. We love you. Both of us are going to be captains this upcoming season, so we're really excited to do that. We do other activities here at Prep as well, but mock trial takes up most of our time. A little bit about why we wanted to do this internship. So Seattle Prep did a Zoom panel last year with the Seattle Clemency Project, something similar to what we're doing today. And Maya and I were part of that internship, but we were really interested, so we decided to go to that Zoom meeting, and that's what really sparked our interest, because we didn't really know anything about the criminal justice system and incarcerated individuals in Washington. So from that, we wanted to learn more. We went to the Seattle Clemency Project website, I think we went on it during mock trial one day. But after that, COVID hit, we didn't really do that much. So in May, when we saw the email from Coach Scott inviting students to do the internship, we immediately applied. We really just wanted to educate ourselves. That's why we really wanted to do it, learn more, and luckily that happened, so here we are.
Yeah, just adding off of what Daniela said, I think we've learned so much this summer through reading the materials, having meetings with our other awesome interns, and then obviously having conversations throughout the summer with Freddie and Carlton and Anthony. We just learned a lot about the criminal justice system and how a lot of the time here in Washington, it assumes that incarcerated people really have no opportunity to get better, and they aren't given the support or the resources to better themselves and re-enter society. And through our conversations with the 3 men here, we've just learned about the mistreatment of incarcerated people and how on a day-to-day basis the system in places where we aren't even seeing ourselves from outside of the criminal justice system are working a lot more on punishing individuals rather than lifting them up and helping them grow. And that's just something that we want all of you to take out of this panel. And I think especially it's important that in the prep community, we're all educating ourselves on this, because most of us come from a place of privilege and we are able to just turn our backs on something that isn't directly affecting us, when in reality a lot of the stuff that us prep students are learning every day, like being men and women for others and just reaching out to people on the margins, are Jesuit values that relate so much to what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, so enough about Maya and I and our internship. We're really thankful to be here. We want to start talking to our amazing panelists here. So we have a ton of questions prepared. I know Jen introduced all of you, but if you could just say your names so that everyone knows who you guys are. You guys have the pamphlets that have a short bio on each of the panelists. So you can read a brief intro through that, but you're going to learn a lot more through our questions. So.
I've seen a couple people shaking their heads as if they didn't have the pamphlets back in the middle. Maybe we can get some later. My name is Anthony Powers. I'm with the Seattle Clemency Project.
Carlton Daniel. I'm also part of the Seattle Clemency Project.
And I'm Freddie Hampton. I kind of sort of deal with the Clemency Project in other ways.
All right, thank you. So our first question for you guys, we want to start by just giving some context to the audience. So just telling them how long your sentence was, and we know all 3 of you had really complex situations, but just explaining what the crime was that led to that sentence. Obviously, Carlton, we know you didn't do anything, but anyway, go ahead.
I can start. As Jennifer mentioned, I was locked up at the age of 16. I was locked up with my older brother. He was 21 years old, and we were locked up for first-degree murder.
I did 22 and a half years. Imagine this, probably like a lot of people here in this room, I was a person who thought anybody who was inside of the back of a police car was a bad person, lock them up, throw away the key, don't never let them back in society again, until one day it happens to you. You know, there was a detective who asked me to give him information about a case that was going on. I refused, and next thing you know, I was doing 22 and a half years in prison for not helping. So I'll get into more of that later.
And I did a second-degree robbery, a number of them, but the system doesn't tell you when you go and get sentenced on your crimes that it's a strikeable offense. So I went in front of the judge, and they said that this is a strikeable offense, and I'm like, what is that? And they said, well, this is the 3 strikes thing. So you're looking at being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. So I was actually supposed to die in prison for a second-degree robbery. That there was no harm to anybody.
And Freddie, you just touched on this a little bit, but I mean, you explained a little bit about the 3 strikes law. I don't think anyone in the audience knows what it is, but if you could explain what that 3 strikes law was, and you also touched on this a bit, but what exactly you knew about it before you were convicted?
Before I was convicted, I didn't know anything about it. And when I was sitting in the county jail, after they said that I was looking at being struck out with the 3 strikes, then I started looking more into it. And when it first came out, the 3 strikes law was supposed to be to put away the most heinous and aggravated murder criminals that there were. And once the bill passed, they added all of these other crimes onto it. So you got second-degree assault, second-degree robbery, and so many other crimes. So a lot of people didn't know what all these were. The 3 strikes law was generally set up to just put people away. There was no option. The judge couldn't make a decision and say, well, this person isn't bad enough that we have to put him away. He would actually tell you, I have no discretion in this. You must go to prison. So the 3 strike law was pretty much set up to just put people away in prison for the rest of their life. With me, I went in and because they asked me before when we were having our meetings, my mindset in going in was numb, actually, because I didn't know what I was going in for, because I didn't know what I was going to step into. You know, my mindset was, I'm going to have to probably fight every day that I'm in prison just to, you know, keep myself alive and hopefully not harm anybody else. Once I got into prison and got situated and everything else inside, I had to make up my mind what I wanted to do, because my attorneys, after I was sentenced, they said, well, they're looking at changing the law and removing the 3 strikes from it. And with them telling me that, I had to make up my mind, did I want to go in and be a hardcore prisoner, or did I want to go in and do things that's going to help me, so when they do change that law, that I'll have a way to get out. And that's what I did.
We'll talk about that a little bit more later, Freddie, but same question for you, Anthony, and for you, Carlton. What did you know about the criminal justice system going in? Anthony, you as a juvenile, and then as Freddie talked about his mindset, what was your mindset going in?
So I didn't know anything about it. I just figured, you know, it was a dark place. It had to be violent. People died in there. I thought people sexually abused in there. So that was my whole thought process. And for me, all I could think about was, what can I do to make sure that never happened to me, so that I wouldn't be a victim? And I was angry. I was extremely angry, you know, because I was mad at the system. And so I didn't understand how it worked. I didn't understand nothing, you know, so it was just nothing but anger at first. I didn't know how to concentrate on the appellate procedures, family, nothing. Only thing was just anger, and I figured that would keep everybody away from me.
And for me, I didn't know anything going in. I actually contemplated suicide in the county jail, because I was like, I'm only 16, I'm gonna do at least 10 years. And 10 years when I was 16 seemed like forever, right? But then, you know, I pushed through and I started asking people, well, what is prison like? And people who told me in prison, well, you have to stand up for yourself. And it panned out to be true. If you don't stand up for yourself, at least how it was back then, if you didn't stand up for yourself, then you would be a victim. So right before I got there, they had a 16-year-old who got gang raped. And nobody stood up for him because he didn't fight for himself. So I knew going in that I had to, you know, fight. And then, sure enough, after my first fight, when I stood up to the guy, then other people were coming to me saying, "Hey, look, if anybody else messes with you, just let me know. And then they're willing to, you know, which is completely backwards, right? I mean, I was an underage kid in there, thrown into Walla Walla, which at one point had the record for the most murders in the United States, anywhere in the United States, as a prison. And this is where they sit as underage kids.
So diving in more to your guys' time in the system, this seems almost like a rhetorical question, but did you have any mentoring support or resources while you were inside? Or was it mostly just your mindset that got you through?
So for me, I had my mother. I'm a mama's boy. I'm not scared to say it. Nobody got mad at Superman when he was scared of kryptonite. No, I'm a mama's boy, so instantly my mother was the first person who, she knows me. She's like, don't worry, I know you didn't do it. And she started calling every talk show you could think of. And nobody answered her except one person. And Ed Bradley, rest in peace, he worked with 60 Minutes. He flew out to come visit me, and we talked. And his investigator actually found a lot of the evidence for my attorney to show that I wasn't there, you know, doing the crimes, which the judge didn't let come in. And so he stayed in my life in the beginning of my time, and always kept telling me, you know, you're gonna make it, you're gonna make it. And then so I made a promise to my mother that I wasn't gonna do all my time. You know, I promised her, I said, don't worry, I'm not gonna do all my time. And she passed away 2 years before I got out. And before she passed away, I asked for them to put the phone up to her ear. And I promised her, and I said, you know, every day of my life from here out is my way to say thank you to you. And so like everything, I feel like everything I've done in my life, I haven't done it for me, it's all been a thank you. And I actually got out 13 days early. So I felt like the promise was fulfilled. But that was my drive the whole time.
Great, okay. I'll go first next time.
Speak on my mindset already. What am I keeping up?
If you received any support or mentoring
Oh,
while you
support.
were
No, I didn't actually have any support. My support came from God because I was already Muslim, and I went in and I didn't really know anybody in Washington. I still don't have any family in Washington, but I love Washington, so I'm here. And my support system was pretty much bow down and pray and talk to God. And if it was meant for me to have it, I would have it. And if it wasn't meant for me to have it, I wouldn't. And I just had to go through each and every day that way, you know. So that's what I did.
That's actually a good point, because I never thought of it like that, as far as also the support we get from each other in there. I mean, mentorship was hit and miss. There's a lot of negative mentorship. People teaching you how prison works. You know, hey, don't talk to the police. This is how the drug market works. You know, they thought they were doing the right thing, which actually in turn later on down the line helped change the course, which we'll get into later. But as far as outside support, I had some support from my family in California, and you know, my mom was stuck in there. You know, as you go along, more and more people either pass away or just fall off because they lose hope.
Right, so it doesn't sound like there was any support from the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
It was, no. So how did you work to better yourselves on your own? Like, what did that routine look like for you guys?
I mean, for me, I was a young, angry kid, so my first 10, 11 years, I actually was getting in trouble all the time, right? So it was 11 years in, I had a teacher, because you had to take a class to get out of what was the whole solitary confinement. So you had to take 1 or 2 classes. I took the shorter class, thinking it'd be the easier one. And my teacher was, she seemed like she was sincere about it, right? And that had an impression on me. And even though I thought the class was garbage, it still had an impression on me that she wanted to make a difference, right? So I was like, all right, maybe I'll change, maybe I won't. And then a month later, my grandmother passed away. And then it was a moment for me where I was like, you know, being 18 or being 21 doesn't make you a man, your conduct makes you a man. And I vowed that I would never get in trouble again. And before that, I had 44 major incidents inside the prison system. And after that, I never got in trouble again.
All right,
I'll go.
yeah.
So for me, it's kind of weird. There was an officer, his name was Miller, and I eventually saw him again. We got sent out of state, and he was a CPM when we were in Arizona. So he kept seeing me always angry, he's a big tough guy, always lifting weights. Don't talk to me, don't speak to me. And one day he said, I think you should talk to these guys. I think they'll listen to you. I'm not talking to these guys. I don't want to say, and they better not say nothing to me. But really, I was scared. And a couple weeks later, a guy's mother had passed away, and this officer told the chaplain, he says, I think you should have Mr. Daniel called out to speak to him. So they had me called out to the chapel to speak to this young man about him losing his mother. And he was just breaking down, bawling. So I started talking to him, and I saw his mood change. And I'm just talking to him because I felt for him, because again, I'm a mama's boy. And that day I realized that there was a change for me because I was angry. My anger was I wanted to put the Department of Corrections and the criminal justice system out of business. And so I felt like the only way to do that was to stop people from coming to prison. And I made it my mission to do everything I could because of what I received from that officer. And when I actually went back into the prisons and started visiting the prisons and speaking at the different prisons, he's actually the third prison I went to, he was there. And I couldn't help it. I just started bawling, crying. He started crying, and I couldn't stop thanking him. So that was.
Okay, so with me, what got me going, I started taking a lot of classes, and I took stress and anger management and victims awareness because I wanted to understand, the other side of a crime, and I wanted to be more knowledgeable about what I do and how it affects those other people. And what I learned was that even though they were victims, I was a victim at the same time. So in me understanding that anything that I do, it affects somebody. It might not affect that immediate individual, but it affects somebody down the line. So I started doing things to make sure that I would never be put in a situation where I was harming somebody ever again. So for me, it was a thing they say that you should think 5 times before you act or you speak. And so that's what my, thing was. That became my motto of let me think this through before I, say something or act on something. And that's what got me through my first 7 years of prison, which was at Walla Walla. And once I got through that, I went to Monroe, and then we went out of state. And once we got out of state, it was a whole nother environment, but I had to keep that same concept of, and that's what brought me through and gave me the support that, I used.
All right, well, mine, I want to talk a little bit about the actual Seattle Clemency Project. That's a huge part of why we're here today. So Carlton and Anthony, we know that you work for the Seattle Clemency Project, but we just want to know how you found out about the Seattle Clemency Project in the first place.
How I found out about it, John Zoloff came in to visit somebody just before the actual founding of the project. And I found out about John Zoloff, so then I kept in touch with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when the project was founded, then I heard about the founding of the project with him and Jennifer Smith.
I actually hadn't heard of it. And then one day a friend of mine had called me from the penitentiary, this gentleman named Ray Lewis. He called me and he says, hey, I'm going to be going through clemency, and I would like for you to come, be a character reference for me, testify at my hearing. I said, okay, no problem. He says, well, I'm going to have my attorneys contact you. I said, no problem. So John Zoloff was his attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to meet with John Zoloff, Jennifer Smith, Emily, and we all met at a Panera Bread. And we started talking about this case and what I would say and when it was. When I was listening to them and what they were doing, and so for me, I saw something that impressed me. It was they actually cared about the people. And that meant everything to me. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about photo ops, it was about the people. And eventually, you know, the rest was history after that.
And with me, it was a thing of, I was sitting there and somebody kept saying, hey man, why don't you apply for clemency? And I was like, man, I'm not applying for that stuff because that ain't gonna help me and all this other stuff. And I think it was a year after that I said, they were like, man, what do you have to lose? So I wrote the Clemency Project and they wrote me back and they said, well, we need you to gather all of this information together and send it to us so that we can look it over and decide if we can help you or not. And after I gathered everything with the majority of everything that they wanted and sent it to them, Jennifer and Emily actually came up and visited me and we sat and we talked and they said that I was a good candidate for clemency. So from that point on, I started redirecting everything in my life again to be more ready for, if this goes through, what I'll have to do out here in society again. So, and I know y'all want to keep this short.
You're fine.
And so my thing was, and I'll tell this to anybody, Seattle Clemency Project is a great place, okay? And I love those people because without them, I wouldn't be here now. So I always there to help them in any kind of way. But I had to change myself again and I started making plans because they say if you don't have a plan before you get out, you're gonna fail. And it's true, you know, and I planned and I planned and I planned, and the day I got out, I went into a transitional house. A month later, I had a job. I already had a vehicle. I just had to get my driver's license. So I had everything in play to whereas I can make it out in society. And with the support that I have now, these two brothers here, and Jennifer and the Seattle Clemency Project, I don't see myself ever going back to prison ever again.
Great, so we have some individual questions about your guys' process through clemency. Obviously, Freddie and Anthony, your guys' personal experience, and then Carlton, mentoring people who are petitioning currently. So Freddie, I know you just touched on this a little bit, but could you just explain a little more about your personal process petitioning and what that looks like for you, your mindset?
Well, like I said, when I first wrote them, and they wrote me back and said, you know, gather all this material. And it takes a while to gather that material together. So it's not a quick process, you know. I think it took, just from us holding our conversation and me gathering all the information and paperwork that they wanted, it took us at least a year and a half just for that. And then after they gathered all of that and then they found attorneys to represent me, then I had to go through that same process again with those attorneys because they had to come up and meet me and you know, we had a feel for each other and things. So then we moved forward with that and they gathered all their information that they needed, and that took probably about another year before we could even get a hearing with the Clemency Board. And then after we got the hearing with the Clemency Board, it took another year and a half before I could be released from prison because we had to wait for the governor to sign the paperwork and then the paperwork to be processed. And so you're sitting here, but you're not thinking like this. You're like, okay, I got clemency. Okay, you start getting rid of your stuff and mailing things out to people. And then you're like, well, when am I leaving? They say, oh, you're not going anywhere for a while. You're like, so now it's a whole nother world for you. So yeah. So.
Right, Anthony, we know there was a change in the law that affected your sentence. Could you just explain that change and how that led you to petition for early release?
Yeah, so in 2012 they had a case called, it was referred to as Miller versus Alabama. It was a United States Supreme Court case that said mandatory life sentences for juveniles is unconstitutional. So they had to reevaluate how they treat juveniles, people who were sentenced to prison as juveniles. which led to what they refer to as the Miller Fix in Washington State, where there was a presumption of release for anybody who was locked up under the age of 18, 25 years for aggravated murder, 20 years for first-degree murder or anything less. And so that's when, I was already past that 20-year mark, and I was able to petition. And we can get into the weeds later on as far as what happened after that.
So Carlton, you touched on this too a little bit, but what inspires you and keeps you wanting to work with people who are petitioning?
Change. I have a huge passion to want to change the public's perception of someone who is incarcerated. I've been in rooms with state legislators and senators and other businessmen and women who could not believe I was ever in prison. And I'm like, they're just like me. They're people, and so that process of showing somebody you are somebody, you are somebody special, and for me, I felt like there's nobody out here in the public who can have more passion for success than me, or someone just coming out of prison, because we've already been to the lowest points of our lives. So it's like I have this passion to succeed, and then I have this passion to let other people have that passion too, and try and cultivate that with them and bring it out of them. It's like however I can do it, I want to do it. I met a young man in Carter who he's like my hero now. High school kid, but he's my hero because he got all his friends together to help us, get backpacks for people who are coming out. Because this is what we're doing, trying to help people. So that's where my passion is, and I see it within the people of having to be able to tell their stories when it comes to clemency. It's sometimes it's difficult for them, and so just to bring that out of them and help them tell their stories, that's the main thing for me.
Same for you, Anthony. We know that you also help people who are seeking clemency. What motivated you to want to help those people?
What motivated me, it actually started inside of prison. One day when me and Carlton were speaking, and he was talking about the importance of being a positive influence. Because I was already a positive influence at that point on my circle, on the group that I had direct influence on, but he was talking about the importance of having a broader influence on people. And then, so it got my mind thinking of, I really wanted to get on that track, but I just had to figure out how I was going to go about it. And then a guy came to me, because I was in a leadership position, and a guy came to me and he said, hey, I have this guy who's willing to bring in an ounce of meth. I'll give you $500 to give me permission to, and $500 in prison is like 50,000 out here or something like that. It's like, you're making 32 cents an hour, right? So I ended up talking to him for about an hour, because I was like, you're in prison for the fourth time. What are you in prison for now? He said drugs. I said, what were you in the first time? He said drugs. I said, second time drugs, third time drugs. I said, what happens every time you go to prison? He said, I have to start over from scratch. So we ended up talking for about an hour. And then that's really when it clicked for me that the influences that we have on each other inside of the prison system are leading more people to come back to the prison system, because you're just encouraging people to stay engaged in the criminal lifestyle. So after that, I set out to change the culture inside of the prison system, and then that's what led to the Redemption Project, and to set out to change the culture of prisons. And it was highly successful. It actually spread to every prison in Washington State. I wrote the curriculums, and one of the things that motivates me to this day is when I wrote the curriculum, I wrote just intuitively, I wrote certain things so that it had a certain impact on somebody as they wrote the questions out, and I ended up teaching over 2,000 people while I was in there. So when I hear students say, when I got to this question, this is what I thought, and then that was my intent when I wrote it in the first place, then it's like, yeah, man, I have a knack for this. And then when Steve Sinclair, who was the superintendent of the Washington State Penitentiary, later went on to be the Secretary of Prisons, he asked me to go help him reduce violence there. So to start the Redemption Project there, just to give people context. That place was so negative, the people who were good enough to get out of there, people would dread them coming to the prison that they were in, right? So they had a major riot or staff assault once every 4 to 6 weeks for 6 years straight. So he asked me to come, and I came with my strategy. And the year that I was there was no riots or anything else. So I believe that we can have that impact. And when you have that impact and you have that influence on each other, then that actually makes the community safer. Because if people turn their lives around in there, they're less likely to victimize people out here, which might include you, your family, me, my family, and that's the importance of it. And the reason, in closing, as I get into my speech, the reason in closing, why I called it the Redemption Project is, you know, I was locked up for murder, and you can't go back and apologize to somebody who's passed away. So the reason I call it the Redemption Project is because I believe if we influence each other, then maybe that person who was influenced, instead of getting out and killing somebody, instead of getting out and influencing somebody, like the person who got out and influenced me, he was actually locked up for a nonviolent crime, got out and influenced me to be violent because of what he learned in prison, right? So maybe if we influence each other in there on a positive note, then they'll get out, and instead of being criminals, they'll actually be assets to the community.
Amazing. Okay, this question is directed at you, Freddie. You talked about your process petitioning for clemency, but I doubt anyone in the audience knows very much about what the process is like. So if you could talk a little bit more about the process, essentially what do you have to show the Clemency and Pardons Board to just show them that you're a candidate who is eligible for clemency or a good candidate?
Okay, going down their list, they say, write a brief bio of yourself to let us know, you know,